Trans people in Canada and the world at large are being made the scapegoats of today's culture war. Their rights and even their humanity are being put to question by ideologues and politicos alike. In Quebec, trans people have been frustrated with the long delays to instituting an X gender marker on their driver's licenses and other government IDs. Currently, only one person in all of Quebec has such a marker. Susan Roy, the Minister of Families, that said that Quebecers will have to wait until 2025 to receive such gender markers on their IDs. So today, I am here talking with Celeste. Celeste Trianon, a trans feminine jurist, legal clinic operator, and human rights defender based in Montreal. How are you doing, Celeste?
I'm doing good.
Nice, nice. So yeah, immediately, could I have you speak a bit on why people are trying to get this X gender marker on their IDs?
I'd say, of course, if you're wondering why people want said external marker in the first place, it's usually for very personal reasons. It's because it's a way to help reflect their identity on paper. It's because it is, the very representation of their identity goes onto their ID cards. And if the labels F or M do not work for you, then what else? That's part of the issue here. Part of the issue behind the necessity of the external marker is the fact that we as a society still remain extremely dependent on codifying gender as a legal identifier and not as a personal innate characteristic.
Thank you for that. Um, what kind of support or supportive, I guess, voices or motions have you heard from Quebec administrations and government bodies towards moving towards this kind of eventuality of having X gender markers?
Honestly, it's been very disappointing. So, for some historical context, initial proceedings were filed for trans rights in courts like in Quebec as early as 2014, so 10 years ago. And it was these same proceedings that led to the external marker being legalized on provincial birth certificates, which is why now you have folks who actually do have external markers on their birth certificates. I believe there's at least 400 or 500 of them who do. Then, of course, after that, you have an external marker on your birth certificate. Sure, but what about your ID cards? Who presents their birth certificates as proof of identity anywhere? The answer's no one.
Hmm.
Instead, we use RAMQ cards, so our health insurance cards, and driver's licenses as typical ID documents. And unlike every single other Canadian province, we do not have that. All we have is female and male as gender marker options, which vastly do not represent the gender spectrum as we know it.
Could you speak a little more on how Quebec compares to other provinces, I guess, on these kinds of issues?
Absolutely. So Quebec is definitely the last when it comes to many things related to gender identity. I mean, although this recently in the last 12 months it's become less and less the case, but until very recently Quebec was always the last. That's how we're the last province to even have external markers on any document, birth certificates included, period. We were the only jurisdiction that required citizenship in order to change your name and or your gender marker up until 2021. We were the last in so many regards, and people are tired of it. Because Quebec used to, once upon a time, be the first. For example, when it came to allowing same gender parents to be able to raise children the same way as heterosexual couples. So just as an example, Ontario has allowed changing gender markers since like at least the mid or late 2010s. The same goes for basically every other Canadian province. Some even allow to remove gender markers altogether from ID upon request. And here, none of that's an option. That's
That's
why
really
people are
interesting.
frustrated. It's because of that, and also because of significant waiting times. Folks back in
Mhm.
2021 expected that extra markers would be implemented on provincial ID right then. Same went with 2022 when Quebec Bill 2, as modified, was adopted. Same goes in 2023 when people were like, hey, it's been more than a year, what's up? And now we're in 2024 and the government is purposely pushing back the delay once again. People are angry. It's been more than 3 years since the ruling that found that the lack of external markers on birth certificates violated both the Quebec and the Canadian charters. So why would it not be the case for provincial ID?
There's two things I would love you to comment on. Well, one of them I'm kind of curious on. how you imagine that Quebec has sort of lost its first place status for kind of where like sexual and gender rights, but then also the kind of you just brought it up at the end there, the sort of like it was found to be in violation of charter rights. So if you could speak on those two things.
I'd say one of the biggest reasons why Quebec has been so backwards is it very much still lies in this paradigm of second wave feminism, one which is very much more focused on one which is like more like 70s feminism, which has led us to like many great human rights advances. For example, in the 80s, instituting full legislated equality. It does not necessarily mean equity in practice, but full legislated equality for married couples in the 80s. But this paradigm does not read itself well when it comes to reflecting the needs of both women of color, trans women, trans people in general, and many other marginalized communities that were just not accounted for within said paradigm. It's why, for example, Quebec has had these advances for like when it came to making sure same gender couples were able to have full civil rights. It's because it fit well within their paradigm. That's why you see Quebec discriminating actively against Muslim women. That's why you see them discriminating actively against trans people. It's because it's easier for them to do so. It fits better within their paradigm of quote unquote how things should be. And also let's add on top of that, the French language does pose a pretty significant change whenever it comes to the very idea of gender, because of the fact that gender is something that's so deeply encoded within our language. French remains a language in which the masculine gender predominates. It is, by its very nature, a patriarchal language, and people have been very hesitant to modify our language, to make it evolve in order to adapt it to reality in which gender identity does not dictate gender identity and perceived gender do not dictate whether you are quote unquote superior or quote unquote inferior in the eyes of society.
And then I had a second question about the you brought up the constitutionality, I believe, the charter rights and these desires rather to have the X gender marker on driver's licenses. Could you
Mhm.
talk on that?
Absolutely. So I'd say I'm pretty sure, like I cannot say with certainty, and I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. But I definitely would say that considering the Moore ruling, which based its evidence off of notably misgendering using IDs, etc., and considering the status quo in every other Canadian province, I'm pretty much sure that the lack of external markers on provincial ID will not stand a chance in court. It is very much a violation of trans people and non-binary people's dignity. It prevents them from being able to reflect who they are. It prevents them from expressing their identity. It prevents them from being who they are, from expressing very much a fundamental element of themselves, and also is a breach of their dignity, of their privacy, and their equality rights. So I'd say because of the fact that the legal arguments have already been used time and time again, and they've worked before, I wouldn't see how the Quebec government can get away with this.
At your legal clinic, I guess I'm kind of curious what how the clients of the legal clinic, how are they reacting to kind of these developments, these news, or this kinds of these? What are their frustrations that they share with you?
They, a lot of them are growing very impatient because a lot of my clients, like I'd say about 200 of them, got their name changed, their name and gender marker changes within the first month of the external marker being legalized on provincial provincial birth certificates. So
Mhm.
folks went into that assuming that they also have the external marker on their IDs, but they did not. They're now stuck in some sort of limbo where you might have someone who has an external marker on their birth certificate, an F on their driver's license, and an M on their RAMQ card because of the way that the government recognizes their gender identity. So that's the situation we're in right now. People are
Mhm.
growing increasingly frustrated. I believe right now there's been at least 400 people who've requested the external marker on their RAMQ card, and at least like a good like amount for driver's licenses as well. This is an issue that does not concern only one person; it concerns so many more. And 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 you want to guess why one person in Quebec has an external marker on their driver's license? Because they settled with the SAC after filing a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. And they were extremely annoying about it, so the SAC just gave up. Remember, we're talking about these public organizations that have the ability to issue external markers on their ID. They are able to. It's not as if they can't, but they're refusing to do so because the government has ordered them to. It's government overreach.
Government overreach. Do you some excuses I've seen from government institutions is that they say it's complicated to sort of like change on the back end systems with their computers. I'm kind of curious what you make of those kinds of excuses.
Actually, the technological argument could have worked for a period of time, but we're now over a year and a half since the external marker was adopted into law, and we're seeing more and more the consequences of this. People are growing increasingly frustrated, and in the case of the SAC, they are now able to issue external markers on their front end, like visibly, even though like in their backend files they still don't have the option for the external marker. They can still issue cards containing the external marker, so they are fully able to do so. So why isn't that possible yet? That is the problem here, because it is possible now. There is no more technological issue that prevents them from issuing external marker IDs. So, just why? I don't have anything else to add.
Do you think I'm kind of curious because I think there's this report that there's a committee that was formed right on like gender
Yeah.
identity at the provincial level, and apparently there's like this kind of like intention to wait until this committee files its report, and I'm kind of curious what you make of this committee as well as these kinds of like continued prolongations.
Okay. I'd say first and foremost, the fact that the committee exists or does not exist does not excuse the Quebec government violating its constitutional obligations. The Quebec Charter is the supreme law of Quebec. Canadian Charter is the supreme law of Canada, and it is completely irresponsible for them to continue acting as if these did not exist. It's why we have discriminatory legislation like Bill 21, with the government being able to get away with it, because they refuse to bow down to the constitutional order. They refuse
I
to
can't tell if
respect
you're
the
still
rule of law.
talking. The audio is kind of cut out on my
Of
end.
course. I'll repeat my last two sentences. It's because the Quebec government is able to pretend and act as if it were above the rule of law, the Constitution, and so much more. They're acting as if they were completely immune and all-powerful. That's not the case. My audio is still working. Do you hear me?
Celeste, can you hear me? I do not hear you.
Does it work this way?
Okay, I can't hear you though. It should still be recording, so I'm gonna let you restart that answer.
All right.
And then once you're done talking, you can let me know in the chat, and we'll sort of wrap things up.
I'll give you like a visual. I think because we're filming this, like I'm gonna just give you like a chat cue instead of a visual cue. Okay, so can you repeat to me the question?
Of course. So I've heard about this committee being formed at the provincial level on gender. I do believe almost all the members of this committee are either heterosexual, straight, white, and also of a certain age. And they've been kind of tasked with creating this report on gender, sort of prompted by these developments on people requesting the X gender marker on their government IDs. And so there's this kind of pause in further developments on having that kind of marker to see what this committee reports. And I'm kind of curious what you're expecting from this committee, as well as just the general delays, I guess, that we've spoken about before.
All right. So regarding that, what I'll say first and foremost is that committee or not, comité de sage or not, the Quebec government is violating the rule of law by continuing to believe that it's above the Constitution and above the Quebec Charter. It is pretending that it is completely immune to the intervention of courts and very much the fact that trans people have a fundamental right to dignity, to equality. By trying to refer the matter to the Comité de Sage and making folks wait another year or two or more, depending on what the committee says, than just, letting us have our basic fundamental human rights, which includes external markers on IDs. On top of that, let's say, remember, the Quebec Charter is the supreme law of Quebec. The Canadian Charter is the supreme law of Canada. And the Quebec government cannot pretend as if these do not apply to it, because it does. But on that, many folks in the trans community have fairly low expectations for the Comité de Sage because of the fact of its composition. It's composed of 3 people, all of them white, all of them at least middle-aged, and on top of that, who are being paid a very generous sum, about 3 times more than the annual salary of a trans person in Quebec, if I'm correct. And this very much puts us in a situation of inequity. There are people who have way more access to resources and who also contain views that are not exactly ones that are reassuring the community. It's why you see, for example, people who are concerned about what's going to happen because of the fact that 2 to 3 members of this committee have ties with anti-trans groups in Quebec. So, of course, folks are deeply concerned, and there's a campaign right now going on in order to call for the government to abandon this committee. But hey, regardless, human rights must come about first and foremost. Trans people are deserving of dignity, they are deserving of being able to live in civil society the same way as everyone else. And that's something that we must not forget.
Thank you very much for your time, Celeste. I hope you have a great day.
No problem. It's such a pleasure.